All right, good afternoon. My name is Lance Janda. I'm chair of the Department of Social Sciences here at Cameron University. I want to welcome all of you that have joined us for our virtual presentation today by Dr. James LaPlant of Valdosta State University in Georgia. I'm gonna introduce a little slow, give people time to join in because I think we'll have some more coming along as we go, but we also don't want to wait too long because I know a lot of you are interested in Dr. LaPlant's presentation. I did want to tell you that today's event is sponsored by the university, by the Department of Social Sciences, by the School of Graduate and Professional Studies, and by the Dr. William L. and Barbara Searcy Endowed Lectureship in Political Science. Those are donated funds that we use every year to expand the discussion and the study of political science at Cameron University. And today's event is an excellent example of the kind of things we do to try and promote free discussion, open discussion of ideas regarding politics and other issues that face American society. You all are probably aware that the way we've set this up is your microphones and cameras are muted. That's not our attempt to silence you. It's a necessary arrangement in the age of Zoom. It will mitigate any kind of distractions that sometimes happen from background noise or things happening behind speaker views. You will be able to ask Dr. LaPlant questions. The chat room is open. If you can post questions there, only I will see them. But then when at the conclusion of his presentation, I will go through those questions and we'll get him to answer as many as he can. As far as my students, those of you that are here at the conclusion of Dr. LaPlant's remarks, what you need to do is get in the chat room and just send me your name, and that's how I'll know that you were here. So if you were wondering how you're going to tell me you showed up, that's how you're going to know. Right? With all that said, I want to introduce Dr. LaPlant. He is a 1998 graduate of the University of Oklahoma, where he received his PhD in political science. He joined Valdosta State University in Georgia in 1996. For those of you that don't know, Valdosta is in deep southern Georgia, not far from the Florida line. Professor LaPlant has taught political science at the undergraduate and the graduate level. He's served in a wide array of administrative capacities. At present, he is Dean of the College Humanities and Social Sciences at Valdosta State. He's published a large number of works, refereed journal articles, book chapters, and so on. His most recent two, and you guys will love these titles, the most recent one is Christmas Trees, Presidents, and Mass Shootings, Explaining Gun Purchases in the South and Non-South, which appeared in the Social Science Quarterly last year. And another article that appeared last year is Cock, Clocked, and Loaded, an analysis of the policy regimes of concealed carry on college campuses. He has a wide array of policy expertise in terms of American politics. He's a resident of Georgia, so he is deeply familiar with all the efforts in Georgia related to the last presidential election and the many recounts they had. And I suspect it would be okay with him if you strayed off topic, if you wanted to ask him about the laws recently passed in Georgia dealing with voter turnout. You know, there's accusations of voter suppression, those sorts of things. He is also an ardent Green Bay Packer fan. So if you want to ask him whether Aaron Rodgers should continue to be a quarterback or move on and become the host of Jeopardy, you are welcome to do that as well. And with all of that said, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. James LaPlant. James?
All right, Dr. Janda, thank you. I very much appreciate that warm welcome, and I consider Oklahoma to be my home. I will be visiting next month, as Dr. Janda and I were just discussing. So for the students that are joining us, if we bribed you with extra credit, I hope I make it worthwhile. For our community members interested in this topic, thank you so much for joining us, as well as the faculty members at Cameron University. Like I said, Oklahoma is near and dear to my heart. So it's good to be back, even though I'm still in my office, obviously here in Georgia. Or am I in Georgia? Maybe I am possibly in Area 51 or Roswell. In fact, you don't really know where I'm at right now, but we'll get into that a little later. Let me say at the beginning, folks, I love me some conspiracy theories. Every other spring, I teach a course called Conspiracy Theories in American Politics. My joke is that I'm just going to call it American Politics from now on, because conspiracy theories are now part and parcel to really what we cover and study in American politics. But I love the course. I love the work that my students do in the class. And this is several weeks of lectures that I'm going to try to condense down into 45 minutes because I want to leave plenty of time for your really insightful questions, and we'll have some fun. I mean, there's some serious topics here too, but I hope we have some fun, and I hope you find it of interest. So Dr. Jan, if you want to call up the PowerPoint, so this gives you a break from having to look at me, or maybe you'll still see me in a box on the screen, but a PowerPoint at least kind of helps to frame my arguments. So, of course, the title of our talk is Conspiracy Theories from the Founding, right, to the 2020 presidential election. Just a couple hundred years we'll cover in 40 minutes. And I've broken this into 3 sections. So we'll talk about the history and evolution of conspiracy theories. Then I want to get into some of the really cool survey research and experimental research on why are we drawn to conspiracy thinking, right? What's the psychology of conspiracism? And then finally, let's talk about where we're at today, right? What is the conspiracy culture we have after 4 really fascinating years with Donald Trump? I also taught courses on Donald Trump in American politics. Those were a blast. So we'll talk about where we're at and what can we done. So the next slide is essentially just noting what our first point is. So folks, the history and evolution of conspiracy theories, for my historians who do 19th century history, I apologize because I'm going to fly through about 150 years of American history in a few minutes. But we'll talk about the founding up to the 20th century. So we can look at the next slide, which is on the founding. And many of you who are studying with Dr. Janda or the other fantastic faculty in the department, you might, if you're a history major, you've probably heard of Bernard Bailyn and his essay, Conspiracy in the American Revolution. And so again, I'm probably not telling you anything you don't already know, but during the colonial period and certainly during the Revolutionary War and the early founding of this republic, oh my goodness, conspiracy thinking was rampant on both sides of the pond, right? Amongst the British Parliament, amongst King George, they saw conspiratorial forces operating throughout the colonies. And as you might well imagine, here in the 13 colonies, there was, of course, no shortage of conspiracies about the Parliament or European forces or aristocracies working against us. And Bailyn makes a great point. It played a crucial ideological role in the revolution. And it's probably not surprising that conspiracy thinking was so prevalent, given often fragmentary knowledge about what was going on either side of the Atlantic. So we see it at the founding. And we can take a look at the next slide, which, friends, it has my favorite book title of all time. I mean, this is like a dissertation. Proofs of Conspiracy. This is John Robeson. Proofs of conspiracy against all the religions and governments of Europe, carried on in the secret meetings of Freemasons, Illuminati, and reading societies. I mean, that's like a dissertation title. It just needs a colon in it. I love that title. Robeson is actually a well-known Scottish scientist who wrote this in 1797 in Edinburgh. I've actually been to his grave. I mean, there's better things to do in Edinburgh. I don't know what was wrong with me, but I've been to his grave. So he talks about, right, this Illuminati movement, which, by the way, I find fascinating that the Illuminati movement today is mostly talked about in Taco Bell commercials and rap music, like Beyonce. Is Beyonce in the Illuminati? I find that delicious. But Robeson is one of the first to give structure to the Illuminati as this great and wicked project, fermenting and working all over Europe, anti-Christian, anti-women, corrupting women. Well, as many of my historians may know, and our students, right, there was an Illuminati. There was a Bavarian Illuminati. There was an Adam Weishaupt. It was an Enlightenment movement. It was a movement calling for secularism. Now, they did meet in secrecy, often in Masonic lodges, and had their own rituals. So hence the rise of conspiracy thinking. But the Illuminati and Robeson's book is important to note because it certainly was read and had an impact in the United States. You'll also see the little nuts. If you notice at the bottom of the screen, this is the James LaPlant, How Crazy Are These Books scale. So you might see 1 nut, you might see 2 nuts, you might see 3 or 4 nuts. So pay attention to my highly sophisticated technical rating system of how nutty some of these books are. But again, I love the Illuminati because we even talk about them still in the 21st century. The next slide deals with the triple conspiracy, right? Abbe Burrell writes about the triple conspiracy, and you'll see as that comes up that Burrell is a Jesuit, or claimed to be a Jesuit, expelled from France. So what's the triple conspiracy? And you'll see I put three nuts up there. It's the anti-Christian, the Freemasons, and the Illuminati movement, right? They're all working to destroy religion and order. And again, these writings were translated into English. They were published in the US and England in the early 1800s. They had a significant impact. If we look at the next slide, you will see a discussion of the anti-masonic movement. And oh, friends, I put four nuts up here because, oh, this is delicious. I mean, are you aware there were political parties in the 1820s and 1830s? Political parties focused on what? The dangers of Masonry, the evils of Masonry. David Bernard in Light on Masonry talks about the Masons as an engine of Satan, dark, unfruitful, selfish, demoralizing, blasphemous, murderous, anti-Republican, and anti-Christian. Again, the fact that political parties formed to fight the Masons and had political party platforms about fighting this aristocracy and privileged class is really cool history, right? It's really interesting history. So I wanted to at least note that because this is nothing new in the Republic, right? This is nothing new. Our next slide, of course, talks about anti-Catholic conspiracy theories. And Lyman Beecher, right? All of you are familiar with Harriet Beecher Stowe, right? Uncle Tom's Cabin. Well, Lyman Beecher, her father, wrote Plea for the West. And forget that this was 1835. Let me read this quote to you and tell me if this is something you might have heard in 2016 or 2020. Waves of immigrants under the influence of the Catholic powers. Well, maybe not being attributed to the Vatican today, but waves of immigrants under the influence of the Catholic powers of Europe might decide our elections. They might decide our elections, perplex our policy, inflame and divide the nation, break the bonds of our union, and throw down our free institutions. I mean, might that sound like 3 million people illegally voted in 2016? Or our institutions have been torn asunder in 2020 because of charges that the election was stolen? Folks, we had claims of this in 1835. And I give it 2 nuts. Maybe I should have given it 4. The LaPlant scale is not totally perfect. I'm still refining my nut scale. You might also decide how many nuts you want to give me, and that's totally fine. My wife would probably assign 3 or 4 to me at this stage. So if we move to the next slide, and I want to give props to one of my favorite historians here, and I don't get any royalties, Catherine Olmsted. So if you're interested in summer reading on this topic, I'll give you some books. Real Enemies by Catherine Olmsted, gorgeous book, gorgeous historical analysis. So what she says, I just love this point. Dr. Olmsted says, okay, before World War I, right, prior to World War I, the fear was that conspiratorial forces would take over the government. Like think of the federal government as this baby kitten, this little lamb that we need to protect. And the Illuminati and the Masons and the Catholics and European powers are always lurking and about to take over the federal government. After World War I, the conspiracy thinking shifts dramatically. The federal government becomes the conspirator, right? It's not so much the European forces or the Illuminati taking over our sacred, blessed, innocent government. The government itself is the evil conspirator. And again, 9/11 is the best representation of this, right? That it couldn't have been hijackers. It had to be the government blowing up the World Trade Center, shooting a cruise missile into the Pentagon, and then shooting down that plane over Pennsylvania, right? I mean, that conspiracy theory, in terms of the scope of its evil, you can't get any more evil than that, right? The government did this to itself. So a fascinating shift. Now, my political science, my sociology, my historian students might be saying, well, why World War I? Wouldn't it be World War II? Well, friends, if we look at the next slide, Dr. Olmsted says, here's why World War I is the watershed. Look at the explosive growth in the national government. In 1913, the federal budget was just $1 billion. I mean, that's not even any, that's pocket change today for the federal government, but it was $1 billion. By 1918, after World War I, it was 13 billion. I mean, friends, incredible growth. Also, Dr. Olmsted points to these really growing efforts to track the American public, survey the American public, right? Edward Snowden made some powerful revelations about this in the 21st century. But a young former librarian by the name of J. Edgar Hoover, I just love this narrative. A young former librarian named J. Edgar Hoover, you probably recognize that name, began tracking enemy aliens and dissenters in the 1920s. In 1919, he set up an index card system that catalogs subversive groups and individuals. By 1921, he had almost 500,000 index cards. He went on to be what? Well, he went on to be the director of the FBI. And then, of course, he assassinated JFK. No, do not. Oh, I guess we're recording this. I'm joking about that. I'm pretty sure he didn't assassinate JFK. We all know that was Castro or Nixon or LBJ or probably the mafia. Okay, but we'll get to that later. But do you see Olmsted's point? This crazy growth in the federal government, explosive growth in the federal government, plus the fact that we're tracking, we're monitoring, and this is before computers, right? Way before computers. All of this feeds conspiracy thinking. And then the next slide, and all of you know this, right? There are actual conspiracies. Oh my goodness, how about Watergate? I mean, we now know that Forrest Gump thankfully discovered Watergate. Without that, we might never have known about it. But there was Watergate. There was Iran-Contra. I mean, do you remember studying Iran-Contra? Hostages in Beirut. I mean, just think about this. Hostages in Beirut. We sell arms to the Iranians to help secure their release. The money from those arms sales go to Swiss banks. We get the money to the Contras, who are fighting the communist government or the left-wing government, I should say, of Nicaragua, the Sandinistas. Crazy, right? We're selling weapons to the Iranians, funneling it through Swiss banking accounts, getting it to the Contras who are fighting the left-wing government of Nicaragua, the Sandinistas. I mean, I need a map to follow all of this. I need a flow chart to follow this. So there are powerful conspiracies that, of course, fuel much of our conspiracy thinking. How about our assassinations of foreign leaders or attempted assassinations? And folks, just Google. You may know about this, but Google assassination attempts of Fidel Castro by the CIA. Oh, your tax dollars, well, not your tax dollars, maybe your grandparents' tax dollars at work, right? Exploding cigars. They were going to put tuberculosis in his scuba diving equipment. They were going to have exploding shells when he went down to a reef to go scuba diving. These shells would explode and kill him. They were going to spray thallium in his radio studio, so all his hair would fall out. And of course, without his hair, the thinking was he would lose all of his power. Oh my goodness, it was just crazy. Delicious, absurd, and bizarre. But these were all the assassination attempts made on Fidel Castro that the Warren Commission never knew about. Now, I think the Warren Commission got it right. It was Lee Harvey Oswald. Study Lee Harvey Oswald, learn about Lee Harvey Oswald. He was the lone gunman. But the Warren Commission never, ever knew of all the efforts to assassinate Fidel Castro. Oh, the mafia. Don't forget the mafia. We tried to use the mafia to assassinate Fidel Castro. And the conspiracy theory is that Castro got Kennedy, right? The conspiracy theory is Castro got Kennedy before Kennedy could get Castro. Well, come on. We know it was LBJ, or we probably know it was Nixon. Again, I'm joking. You may have a hard time telling that, but I'm just speculating here about the triangulation of fire in Dealey Plaza. So actual conspiracies, my friends, of course, fuel rampant conspiracy thinking. And I think on the next slide, it really nicely summarizes the historical drivers. So my friends in history or political science or other wonderful disciplines across Cameron University, I mean, keep in mind, conspiracy thinking is driven by what? Fears of foreign influences, waves of immigration. Oh, that's a key theme. You can historically track bumps in conspiracy thinking with waves of immigration, times of war. Well, especially if we lie about how we went into war, like, oh, there's weapons of mass destruction Dr. Olmsted reminds us this whole argument about going into Iraq the second time because of weapons of mass destruction, it fuels conspiracy thinking and distrust. Of course it does. Efforts to suppress dissent and protests. And then I could spend all day on the explosion of the national security state post-World War II. Just the national security establishment by itself and the incredible amounts of money, of course it's going to feed conspiracy thinking. It also leads to actual conspiracies, toppling governments, spying on American citizens, subverting the will of Congress. I want to be clear about that. Actual conspiracies happen from the national security state, but their vast power also gets us a bit down la-la land in some of our views of certain conspiracy theories. So that is an absurdly brief treatment of, 200 years of American history. So let me talk about, on the next slide, we're going to look at some of the predictors of conspiracy thinking. So again, as Dr. Janda nicely noted, my background is in political science. I'm a quantitative guy, right? I love data. I love survey data. I love to run regression models. If you've not been exposed to regression models, be sure to take a quantitative research methods class. It'll be the best experience of your college career. Some of you might be rolling your eyes, and I totally get that. So let's talk about some of the survey research and experimental research on conspiracy thinking. And the next slide is on a study from Ted Gertzel. Now, this is a bit dated. The study from Ted Gertzel goes all the way back to 1994, but it's a good predictor. It's a good predictor of some of our conspiracy thinking. And so if we look at that next slide, it basically shows, so friends, these are some conspiracy theories when Lance and I were in high school or college. Yeah, high school and college. So AIDS was created in a government lab. The government deliberately spread the AIDS virus in the Black community. The Air Force is hiding evidence that the United States has been visited by flying saucers. Okay, I think that one may be true. The FBI was involved in the assassination of Martin Luther King. I mean, can you look at the AIDS conspiracy theories? I mean, that resonates in the pandemic, right? Friends, I often get asked, what's my favorite conspiracy of all time, or conspiracy theory? It's number 8. Ronald Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush conspired with the Iranians so that the American hostages would not be released until after the 1980 elections. Now, for my historians who would chastise me, okay, I don't think this is true. I don't think this is true. This would have been treason by Reagan and Bush, but oh my God, it is a delicious conspiracy theory. If the hostages are released before the election, Carter maybe wins re-election. I mean, you got to remember, Reagan becomes wildly popular in 84, but in 80, he looks a little dangerous. He looks Goldwater-esque. So the conspiracy theory is that Reagan and Bush couldn't have those hostages released. The campaign director, William Casey, goes to Paris, make sure the Iranians do not release those hostages, and then William Casey becomes director of the CIA and mysteriously dies during Iran-Contra when that's brought to light. Okay, let me repeat. I don't think this is true, but this is a crazy conspiracy theory. This is a crazy conspiracy theory that is only fueled by the day that Ronald Reagan takes the oath of office, the hostages are released, right? I think that was to embarrass outgoing President Carter. But, oh, friends, this is a delicious conspiracy theory. I'll just repeat that. And then we were also worried in the 1980s that Japan was going to buy all of America. So that the Japanese are deliberately conspiring to destroy the American economy. Okay, so those are some conspiracy theories popular in the 80s. And if you watch Stranger Things, are you a fan of Stranger Things? That'll introduce you to the 1980s. If we look at the next slide, I think Gertzel has a nice little model, which is the reason I wanted to show it. Now, these are just correlation coefficients. Remember, correlation coefficients just range from -1 to 0 to +1. So if a correlation is 0, there's no relationship. If it's +1, it's a perfect relationship, positive relationship. If it's -1, it's a perfect negative relationship. But what Gertzel finds is that minority status here, mostly African-American status, it's related positively. If you look at the top there, that top arrow, minority status is related to anomia, kind of this sense of isolation, sense of powerlessness. Minority status is also negatively related to interpersonal trust, trust of neighbors, trust of the community. And then minority status right in the middle has its own direct connection to belief in conspiracies. Well, our takeaway from this is that a sense of anomia, if you look at the right-hand side, a sense of anomia, this sense of isolation and powerlessness, positively predicts a belief in conspiracy theories. And I hope this makes sense. As your interpersonal trust goes up, the more trust you have in neighbors in the community, belief in conspiracies goes down. But minority status, and we can talk more later, maybe, the Tuskegee Syphilis Project. Oh my goodness, the Tuskegee Syphilis Project, as well as Jim Crow South. I mean, we can go on and on and on about the Klan and lynchings and night riders. And I mean, there's understandable reason. And then law enforcement ignoring a lot of it or most of it. We can understand why minority status is a positive, strong predictor of belief in conspiracies. It also predicts anomia and lower levels of interpersonal trust. And a lot of this is relevant in the pandemic and vaccinations, right? So a lot of this little chart we come back to during the pandemic, if you will. So that's gertz. I mean, it's kind of a dated study. Oh, and by the way, it was only 300 people in New Jersey. I mean, literally, it was 300 people in New Jersey, but these basic findings have been confirmed in nationwide studies. The next slide we're looking at is a little more contemporary. This is 2014 by Oliver and Wood. And folks, these are conspiracy theories about the Iraq War, 9/11, the birther, right? Don't forget the birther movement. Obama was not born in this country, right? He was born in Kenya. Chemtrails, we all know this, right? Those are not vapor. That's not water vapor. They are spraying mind control agents upon us when you see those chemtrails. And then my last one, which I got to admit, I hate the new fluorescent light bulbs. I'm just going to confess to you, this is one of my favorite conspiracies. The US government is mandating the switch to compact fluorescent light bulbs because such lights make people more obedient and easier to control. Yeah, maybe. Have I told you I hate the new fluorescent light bulbs? Okay, so these are the conspiracy theories they look at, and these are thousands of respondents. Folks, what they find is that well over half of the public subscribes to one or two of these conspiracy theories. It's a good chunk. And you'll see how many are kind of in the middle for neither, right? A lot of people can go either way. They find these things entertaining, maybe they're not sure. But Oliver and Wood note that, again, over half the public subscribes to one or two of these conspiracy theories. So if we look at the next slide, which is really kind of their key findings. Now, there's a lot going on here. These are regression coefficients. All you need to know is that if the oval is filled in, these are statistically significant findings, meaning this helps to predict the birther conspiracy theory. It helps to predict chemtrails, Iraq War conspiracy theories, 9/11. Oh, I shouldn't forget Soros, right? George Soros is constantly behind conspiracy theories, which I find fascinating. Well, look at the pink color. The pink color, the pink highlight, by the way, this is my sophisticated PowerPoint skills, so you can chuckle at it. The pink highlight means that if you believe in end of days or end of times is a very significant predictor of conspiracy thinking. That's pink. Yellow is secret cabal. Secret cabal is a strong predictor of conspiracy thinking, as well as the turquoise or blue, Manichaean. A belief in a Manichaean worldview is a predictor of conspiracy thinking. So you might say, well, what do we mean by end of times? Well, here's the survey question. We are currently living in end times as foretold by biblical prophecy, right? So if you say, yeah, we're in the end of days, we're in the end of days and the apocalypse, the rise of the Antichrist, these things are right around the corner. End of days is a huge predictor. May not surprise you. Maybe political science is often the study of the obvious, but end of days or end of times belief is a huge predictor of conspiracy thinking. What do we mean by Manichaean, like a Manichaean worldview? Well, we essentially mean, the survey question is, politics is ultimately a struggle between good and evil. Politics is a struggle between good and evil. If you agree with that view, you're much more likely to believe in conspiracy theories. And then secret cabal. I love me this question. Here's the question. Much of what happens in the world today is decided by a small and secretive group of individuals. And you might say, maybe. That is, of course, the secret cabal argument. And you'll see in that graph, friends, these are stronger predictors in most cases than race, gender, education, right? These are some of your key predictors. Paranormal is also on there, right? ESP, do you believe in ESP? Supernatural, not quite as strong. Do you believe in ghosts and demons? I was cheering for ghosts and demons, like ghosts and demons should be a really strong predictor. Well, not so much as end of times or secret cabal or a Manichaean worldview. So this is, again, based upon surveys of thousands of Americans. And I think that sheds some interesting light on where we're at. As I note on so that's some survey research. If you look at the next slide, I love some of these experiments. So I wanted to promote another book. I get no royalties. Suspicious Minds. Just think of the Elvis song. If you can start singing to yourself, we can't go on together with Suspicious Minds. I promised Lance I would not start singing. I would not do an Elvis impersonation, but I do a brilliant, okay, no, I don't do a good Elvis impersonation. But if you remember Suspicious Minds, Why We Believe in Conspiracy Theories. I think Dr. Janda has used this book in his course on the history of conspiracy theories. It is a lovely book. It summarizes a lot of great experimental research. So I wanted to talk about three real quick. The desk in disarray, which I cleaned my desk. Normally this would apply to me. Desk in disarray, the exam day experiment, and then the disease outbreak stories. I pulled these specifically for the pandemic, the disease outbreak stories. So let's look at the next slide. The next slide is the desk disarray experiment. Respondents were given two images. Now, on the image to the left, there is a picture. Can you see that? I mean, this is a photocopy and scan from the book, but if you look at the image on the left, do you see a little sailboat in there? Do you see a little triangle and a sailboat in there? Now, the image on the right, there is no image in the right. Although my students will say, Dr. LaPlant, I see a football, or I see an angel. And I'm like, well, I don't know what you're seeing. There's nothing in the image on the right. So they would give students a picture that actually had an image in it and one that didn't. Well, here's what they found. If we sit you down at a messy desk, right? You just sit down at a messy desk. Students would almost always identify the sailboat or whatever image was in there, but they would see a lot of things that weren't in the other image, which was random dots. When they had the students tidy the desk, I find this fascinating, just tidying the desk, just straightening up the desk, they would still see the sailboat, the image, but they almost never saw an image that wasn't there, like in the right image. So here's what they found. The simple task of tidying a desk, straightening up a desk can lead to what? It can lead to a lower likelihood of seeing things that aren't there. In other words, we seek order from chaos. We see things that maybe aren't there when we're surrounded by chaos or when we're surrounded by disarray. So the next experiment, if we look at the next slide, this essentially deals with the exam day experiment. And I bet all the students joining us will sympathize, as well as community members. So if I survey you about conspiracy theories on an exam day, right before the exam, you are way more likely to believe in conspiracy theories than if I survey you on a regular day where it's just a lecture or you're watching a film or you're having a group discussion. So again, stress and anxiety play a role, right? The higher conspiracy thinking on exam day is, I think it portends to the role of stress and anxiety. What's coming up, if we look at the next slide, oh, these are powerful for the pandemic. So disease outbreak experiments. So in one set of experiments, respondents were told about a disease outbreak in an accounting office. When respondents were told that many of the employees died, they were more likely to attribute these large consequences to big causes, right? Like biological warfare or a super pathogen. When respondents were told that, oh, only a few people got sick, they recovered quickly, well, they were more likely to attribute it to mundane causes like, well, somebody came in with a bacterial infection and they touched a door handle. So again, big consequences means what? A big cause. Smaller consequences, the explanation could be mundane. My absolute favorite experiment is on the next slide. Oh, I love this one. I love the next experiment. So respondents were told about, and who doesn't love a zoo? They were told about a disease outbreak at a zoo, okay? Oh, and they were told, okay, the zoo just got a new bunny. They got a new bunny, a very cute bunny on the left, and then a giant menacing grizzly bear is on the right. So the zoo just got a new bunny and they got a new giant full-grown grizzly bear. When respondents were told about a disease outbreak and that most of the animals died at the zoo, they were far more likely to attribute the cause to some kind of disease or pathogen that what? The grizzly bear brought in. When they were told that the disease at the zoo was quickly brought under control by the zoo employees and only a few unlucky animals died, they were more likely to attribute it to the bunny. And again, these are separate groups that mirrored, right? The groups mirrored each other. These groups mirrored each other in terms of age and race and demographics. We randomly sampled people. I say we, I did not do this experiment, but the authors would randomly place people into different groups. So my lesson here, size matters, right? If we have most of the animals dying at the zoo, well, it had to be that grizzly bear. We should never have brought that grizzly bear in. He contaminated the whole zoo. If it's smaller consequences, it's probably a little bunny, the little cute bunny. Maybe that little bunny was responsible for killing a couple of the animals. So scope matters, size matters. Keep that in mind. If you have a pandemic killing millions of people worldwide or hundreds of thousands of people in the United States, maybe the cause has to be what? 5G or China intentionally releasing it? Or Bill Gates, right? I mean, big consequences means big conspiracies. So I find that intriguing. So our last segment, my friends, and again, wanting to leave plenty of time to take your questions, let's talk about our conspiracy culture and what we can do. And I mean, I can't talk about our conspiracy culture without talking about Donald Trump. And I want to note Donald Trump is the best thing that has happened to political science in probably the last 10, 20 years in terms of studies and analysis. I loved teaching my course on Donald Trump and American politics. Oh, what a brilliant campaign he ran in 2016. Let's make the point. Trump didn't create our conspiracy culture. He didn't create political polarization. He didn't create distrust in politicians, religious leaders, scientists, experts in all forms, but he brilliantly packaged it together in a campaign theme, right? Whether it's fears of immigration, rising populism. Don't forget, Bernie Sanders is tapping into populism on the left. Trump is tapping into it on the right, although Trump is weaving it with what? Fears of the browning of America and racial threat creeps in. I need to be clear about that. But Donald Trump didn't create any of this. Now, you may say he accelerated it. He was like a steroid injection into it. But Trump was the perfect storm that brilliantly brought all these themes together. And he never governed to a broad swath of people, right? Wouldn't we all agree on that? I mean, in the end, he fundamentally governed to his base. Absolutely fascinating politician. But to understand where we're at in our conspiracy culture, we got to talk a bit about the Donald. Now, if we look at the next slide, this is one of my favorite lists. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of them. This is just a quick list of conspiracy theories that Donald Trump has mentioned on the campaign trail or mentioned while he was president. Pizzagate, Ted Cruz's father maybe assassinated JFK. Well, I don't know, maybe. And then maybe Ted Cruz's father went to Cancun after that's my silly joke about Ted Cruz's father, that he went to Cancun after he murdered JFK. Antonin Scalia was murdered with a pillow, right? Maybe Antonin Scalia was murdered at that ranch that he went to in Texas. New Jersey Muslims celebrating 9/11. Caravans from Latin America, often funded by Soros. Marco Rubio may not be a citizen, probably not eligible. Joe Scarborough, right? There was a murder of an intern with Joe Scarborough, Obama wiretapping Trump's phone. So I put the image in the bottom because there's probably not been a conspiracy theory that Donald Trump doesn't love except fake Melania. My students remind me that Trump does not like fake Melania. Have you heard this one? Fake Melania is that, well, Donald and Melania have not traveled together for many, many years. She doesn't want to travel with him. So there's a fake Melania. There's a fake Melania who actually travels with him. I mean, this is goofy and silly, but Trump has disavowed this conspiracy theory. So I want to be clear. There are conspiracy theories that the president or former president now has rejected, and fake Melania is one of them. Also, what's not on this list? The birther conspiracy theories, right? I mean, Donald Trump, before he ran for president, Donald Trump introduced himself to a lot of the American public through what? Obama is not a citizen, right? Powerful conspiracy theory. It also taps into racial elements, right? It also taps into racial elements. But Donald Trump was so great for my class. I mean, he was delicious. He was absolutely wonderful for my class. So if we look at the next slide, all right, we essentially went from a conspiracy theorist in chief to what some would argue was a really destabilizing impact in the 2020 election. So now I want to make the point that the arguments about conspiracy theories in last November's election, and oh my gosh, friends, Georgia is awash in them. I am awash in them here in Georgia. But remember, the foundation was poured in 2016. Do you remember the arguments in 2016 that 3 million illegal immigrants voted, which, by the way, happened to be exactly how many votes Hillary won the popular vote by? And do you remember there was a commission? I mean, it fell apart and nothing happened because they didn't find any evidence. But do you remember the commission in 2017 to investigate all these people who voted illegally? Yeah, so the foundation was being laid. And folks, let's be honest, the pandemic brings us unprecedented early voting and absentee voting and incredible changes to our electoral process. I mentioned earlier the profound distrust of experts in all forms, especially when governmental officials are telling you it was fair, it was secure, it was safe. We so profoundly distrust those election officials. That's part of the narrative here. But in the end, as I have talked to my friends in history and political science, right? We have dozens and dozens and dozens of court challenges throughout battleground states, alleging fraud, alleging vote theft, and we're dismissed. We're dismissed, or when the case was presented, they were then dismissed, right? Because the evidence wasn't there, whether it was from a Rudy Giuliani, a Sidney Powell, a Lynn Wood, the list goes on and on. But, and I'll save this for discussion, some of these conspiracy theories have resulted in changes to voting laws. We just did a significant overhaul of our voting procedures here in Georgia, and maybe we can talk about that later. But I just wanted to emphasize this conspiracy theory was in the works from 2016. Well, heck, let's go even further back. Polarization explains a lot of this. Our profound distrust of all things experts, especially elections experts. But in the end, friends, I would argue you could put a commission together. You could put a commission together just like we did in 2017 to investigate 3 million people illegally voting. If you put a commission together this year to investigate all these charges, and I get where they come from. I get where they come from. I have dear, dear friends. I just had lunch with one yesterday. He goes, James, I don't care what you have to say. I don't care what you have to say. You will never convince me that this election was not stolen from Trump. And I'm fascinated. So we talked about this all throughout lunch. But you could put a commission together, and I am absolutely convinced that that commission, much like the one in 2017, would not find evidence. There's just not the evidence to substantiate these charges. So if we look at the next slide, my dear friend, Dr. Janda, what can be done? Okay, can I do a confessional here? Political science is great at diagnosing problems, but we're kind of lousy at times at suggesting solutions. So here's my solutions. And we can talk more. I would love to get your insights, but I mean, we need greater oversight and responsibility from social media platforms. I mean, you saw that Trump was booted from Facebook and Twitter. I find it amusing that this very lecture initially could not be advertised on Facebook because, well, I mean, if you know me, I'm a dangerous subversive. No, I'm teasing, but we ultimately, I think Dr. Janda will tell you, we ultimately were able to get this advertised. But I mean, Facebook is paying attention more. Social media platforms are paying attention more. Look, folks, they're fundamentally there to make money. So I need to be careful about how much social responsibility they're really going to exercise because they are there to make profits. They're corporations. I get it. Folks, we've got to increase social capital. And this is so, we've learned this during the pandemic. QAnon has exploded during the pandemic. We are isolated. We have this sense of anomia. We have got to increase social capital. Robert Putnam reminds us, Robert Putnam, who's written so much about social capital, says we're bowling alone, right? Bowling was at record levels before the pandemic, but bowling leagues were collapsing. So he has this great phrase, we're bowling alone. Well, how can we build social capital? How can we connect better with our neighbors and friends as a bridge to conspiracy thinking? Well, folks, less media consumption in echo chambers. We sow the left and right. The left and right are both guilty of this, simply just listening to news in echo chambers that kind of reinforces what you already think, and reducing polarization. right? We are so polarized. I mean, we were polarized intensely before the Civil War. We were polarized intensely after the Civil War. Much of the 20th century, though, I mean, you could really even argue, you know, from the New Deal on, we had tamped down much of polarization. We had very conservative Democrats, well, Jim Crow Democrats, but we had very conservative Democrats. We had liberal Republicans. That sounds like a crazy phrase to use. We had liberal Republicans. The parties have sorted. The parties have self-sorted, become very homogenized, and especially among party elites. And so if we can reduce our polarization, and again, there's no easy task, but if we can reduce that polarization, less media consumption in echo chambers, increasing our social capital. I mean, you know, there's voluminous literature on all three of these topics. And many scholars will tell you we're probably not going to make a lot of progress on any of them anytime soon. But that's part of what we can do, I think, to address conspiracy thinking. My last slide, I believe, and then I want to open it up. The last slide, and again, we could spend, because I think Dr. Janda, you said we have 3-4 hours to cover all of this. So if we could do a whole hour on QAnon. Well, I just wanted to make a point, and there's our shaman who was part of the storming of the Capitol, reminding us that conspiracy thinking can have deadly consequences. I should not let that go unsaid. Conspiracy thinking can have deadly consequences. But this notion from QAnon of Democrats engaged in the sex trade, murdering of children, drinking of blood rituals. Oh, friends, this is nothing new. Richard Hofstadter. There's a photo of Richard Hofstadter, famous historian, wrote The Paranoid Style in American Politics. Kind of looks like Al Franken. I mean, Richard Hofstadter could be like Al Franken's brother. Al Franken from Saturday Night Live and the former senator from Minnesota. But Dr. Hofstadter reminded us that the sadomasochistic fantasy of bloodlust, murdering of children, drinking of blood, is nothing new. It has defined conspiracy theories for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. Dr. Hofstadter emphasized, right, that you must make the conspirator look like the uber villain, the ultimate villain. Well, murdering children is about as evil as you can get, right? I mean, there's a lot of evil stuff, but, you know, murdering children or drinking blood, that's about as evil as it gets. So what QAnon is alleging is absolutely nothing new. What was being alleged at Pizzagate is nothing new. It takes on deadly consequences, though, when individuals engage or are inclined to engage in violence. I will leave you with a silly story, and that is the recent ship that was trapped in the Suez Canal. Do you remember following that story the last several weeks? QAnon, or Q, we haven't heard from Q in quite a while, but let me emphasize, QAnon advocates were saying that cargo ship was full of children, there were sex trades going on. And it's fascinating, right? I mean, this stuff just absolutely fascinates me that cargo ship wedged into and blocking the Suez Canal ultimately gets connected to this conspiracy theory, right? It ultimately draws in to this conspiracy theory. So friends, that is far too short of an overview of the history of conspiracy thinking, some of the survey research, as well as experimental research, and maybe what we can do and how we can move forward. But again, I want to thank you for having me. I want to open it up. I am thrilled to take your questions or your comments or your observations. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And you know, normally in a public setting, we would all clap. So I will clap on behalf of everyone. So we appreciate your time. For those of you in the audience, we are opening it up to questions. You can use the chat room. We've gotten a few questions already. Your chat button should be down at the bottom of the screen. So James, first question: with a growing distrust of national news media, have social media platforms become fertile ground for seeding conspiracies?
Well, yes. Yes is the very powerful answer, right? We broadcast, I mean, and by the way, this had huge problems, you know, from the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, right? Where we largely got our news from ABC, NBC, CBS. There was what was called PAC journalism. My friends in comm arts and media studies can speak to this better than I can. But, you know, we now microcast, right? We microcast. So I mentioned echo chambers earlier, but yeah, I mean, I think this profound distrust. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I run into when I talk about conspiracy theories that say, I don't trust journalists. But they often mean the ABC, the NBC, the CBS, the CNN, the Fox. I mean, I know I'm starting to drift to the right or left there, but yeah, that lack of trust, I think I mean, just look at how many of us get our news from social media platforms, or get our news from blogs, or get our news from the internet. And, I didn't put this on what can be done, like rejuvenate trust in national journalism or return. I mean, I said we need to be less in echo chambers, right? But folks, I don't ever see us getting back to broadcasting. And some of you might argue, well, that had its own problems, that a lot of issues just didn't get covered. But, you know what? We get our news where we get it, and we have to meet the public. I mean, whether it's academics or politicians, or researchers, we have to meet the public where they get their news and listen to them, and then address disinformation or misinformation. So I agree with the observation. It is a struggle to address it, though, right? It's a struggle to fix it.
Another question, and by the way, I was hoping for a slide on all the secret lizards orbiting in spaceships that run the Earth, but I know we're pressed for time, so you.
David Icke, yeah, can I just a quick plug for David Icke, the lizard people, the interdimensional lizards. David Icke, of course, argues that Hillary Clinton is one of those interdimensional lizards. But yeah, David, I didn't even get into David Icke, but oh, my friends, that's some delicious conspiracy thinking too. Yeah.
All right, I've got one. Says there's current scholarship discussing how modern conspiracy theories are different from traditional conspiracy theories. And I'm going to paraphrase here, but in essence, it's arguing that current movements seem to be all conspiracy and no theory. They seem to employ a large amount of assumptions and evidence picking about undue influence by cabals of insiders and elites, but are very short on the why or even the how such influence is undertaken. What do you think of that theory?
Well, so that's an excellent point. I mean, it's a well thought out, I think, excellent point. So I would argue, if I could paraphrase, and I don't want to do disservice to the insightful author of that comment question. I mean, I think one could argue that conspiracy theories are increasingly sloppy, messy. But I love that point there about not really the theory, not giving us the why or the how. I think there's good arguments there. I think it's the sheer proliferation of conspiracy theories. I think the sheer proliferation of conspiracy theories gives rise to that in terms of, and I love that phrase, right, or that point, mostly conspiracy, very little theory, almost kind of a sloppy type of analysis. Look, go back to what I was arguing about the 1980 October surprise conspiracy theory. I'm not promoting that. I probably sound like I am. That is a beautiful conspiracy theory, right? We have the how, we have the why, we have the motive, we have the coincidental evidence that hostages are released the day that Reagan takes his oath of office. Now, again, I don't think any of this happened. But there are elegant conspiracy theories, I think, as the author of that post is noting, right? There are some kind of your classic elegant conspiracy theories where we begin, right? A damn good conspiracy theory begins with a set of facts that happened, right? That we agree upon. And then maybe we get to flights of fancy, but we have built a case for that. Far too many conspiracy theories today. QAnon is probably the most powerful example of what the author of that post is noting. QAnon, I mean, we almost from the get-go, we're off in sheer flights of fantasy without any of the beautiful, I say beautiful, I don't know if I should show such admiration for conspiracy thinking, but without kind of the classic bones and skeletal structure and so forth. I would say that's still out there though. So it's a probably too far long-winded answer. I love the post. I think that's onto something, but there are still very elegant conspiracy theories out there. They get lost in the clatter and clamor of QAnon and all that we're awash in with our contemporary internet culture. But God, I love that question. So.
Is there a real person who posts as Q?
There is. There is an argument. There is now. Was it HBO? I didn't promote that like some of the books that I did. But was it CNN or HBO that just did a 6-part series on QAnon? And there is an argument made about who Q is. There's some speculation thereof, and I believe I'm right on this. Q has largely been silent since the election. So yeah, there's an argument that there is a Q, that there is an individual. If you're a Star Trek fan, I'm being silly now. If you're a Star Trek fan, there was Q in Star Trek Next Generation. That was what Lance, a demigod being that would kind of occasionally come in and mess with Picard in the Enterprise. So there could be a Q. There could be a Q, but now I'm being silly. But yeah, there's arguments that there's actually a Q, a single individual, or it could be an amalgamation, right? Might very well be an amalgamation. We've often seen that with conspiracy authors, that it's a large amalgamation of individuals and ideas. But I love the question. I mean, I can't answer definitively.
Do you believe, oh, it's a good one. Do you believe part of the blame for the proliferation of echo chamber social media outlets, and I'm paraphrasing again here, could stem from social media companies becoming more restrictive in what types of posts can be posted? Perhaps the act of banning and the suppression of certain incorrect thoughts or ideas is being taken as proof of the legitimacy of their arguments.
Well, so yeah, a couple things to unpack there. So again, I love, these are great comments, and of course, great questions. Look, there's First Amendment issues here at play, right? I mean, I'm a big defender of the marketplace of ideas, right, folks? You put it all out there. I mean, yeah, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, but every time we try to articulate doctrines of clear and present danger speech, it does what? It gets bigger, and you ultimately wind up suppressing the First Amendment. So, I mean, I have concerns about when we embark on this path, and the author makes a great point. And this is classic conspiracy arguments, right? If I suppress your opinion, if I suppress that posting, well, it's got to have some legitimacy. There's got to be something there that the powers that be don't want said. They don't want it out there in the public marketplace. So you betcha, as my mom would say, oh, you betcha. From the upper Midwest, I think it lends that credibility. I would argue, and then I think the other part of the comment posting, if I'm calling that correctly, I mean, I don't know how much it fuels the echo chamber. The echo chamber, friends, has been unfolding for decades, right? The demise of broadcast media, the rise of cable news, the rise of talk radio. Thank God Al Gore invented the internet, right? Without Al Gore, I'm being silly, we wouldn't have the internet. So thank God he invented that. And then we have social media. I mean, all of this was hurling us, right? It was hurling us towards microcasting and echo chambers. And I think while you suppress some of these views or delete some of these views, yeah, does it reinforce the echo chamber? When these views are out there, they often, does that make sense? When those views are out there, they often fuel the echo chamber. But the posting is I think spot on. You suppress these, you shut these things down, which I know is kind of what I said a couple slides ago. You can ultimately fuel conspiracy thinking. You can also ultimately fuel the very thing you're trying to tamp down. It's a great point.
What can I personally do to ensure that I stay out of an echo chamber?
Oh, yeah, what a beautiful point. So there is, and you can Google this, there's a media wheel. Oh, what a beautiful question. There's a media wheel that I've used in class, right? And so the media wheel, which maybe I should have put that in my PowerPoint, the media wheel, basically it has a couple dimensions, right? So it's showing news that's from the hard right to the hard left, or let's say very conservative to very progressive to more centrist media, right? So there's the ideological scale. Think of that as an x-axis. Does that make sense? Think of that as a, kind of a horizontal axis. So we have, right to center to left, but then also what the media wheel or media grid shows is very credible sources down to not credible sources. So let's take InfoWars, right? Let's take Alex Jones's baby InfoWars. Where would InfoWars go? Down here in the right corner, right? Right wing, hard right, but little to no credibility, right? So if you plot your media sources, what you look at for news, from hard left to hard right, from highly credible to more opinion-based, right? I mean, news can still be valuable to gather from opinion columns and editorial pieces to then at the very bottom, which would be the conspiracy theory stuff that is just takes us off into la-la land. The best tools, that's a long-winded way of saying, I think the best tool to avoid an echo chamber is to look at the credibility of the news sources, to look at where they are from the left to the center to the right, and make sure that one is enjoying a balanced appetite of news sources. And so I share that media wheel. I share that media grid with friends in the community. I teach learning and retirement classes when I work with my students. And I say, look, seek out a menu of sources that give you left, center, right. Center is probably a good source often, and that is more on the credible side than, of course, the non-credible side. And if you're watching nothing but Fox for 12 hours a day, or you're watching MSNBC for nothing but 12 hours a day, diversify your news portfolio. And that, I think, and then can I make a final point? Conversations with, my God, now I sound old school, but conversations with friends over coffee, right? Or on a softball team. So your fraternity or sorority has a softball team, or the history department, social science department has a softball team. Just conversations over a beer or over coffee or at some kind of social capital building event. I swear to God, I'm still convinced those are our best tools. But now I probably sound like I have my head in the clouds on these things.
No, the variety is good. I tell students too, there's and I have no direct connection to the website, but there's a site called realclearpolitics.com. And
Sure.
It's for the older folks in the audience. It's like Reader's Digest used to be, where every day it'll post a bunch of links to stories from a whole range of sources. So it might be New York Times, Wall Street Journal, a huge array from the right to the left. And so it's one-stop shopping, and you can click on different articles from different sources and get different takes on the same event in a relatively short period of time. And so that can be good.
My friend, thank you. So yeah, news.
Right. What impact will new voter suppression?
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah, news aggregators, right? Those sites that are massive news aggregators is a great point. So if you're like, well, I don't have the time to necessarily look at, okay, what am I following? Where is that on the media wheel or the media grid? Well, news aggregators is a perfect path to go. Thank you.
What impact will new voter suppression laws have on election conspiracies?
Oh, so I would argue that, and the question is what impact will they have on future elections, but what impact will they have on conspiracies or conspiracy thinking?
Yeah, I think so. Well,
I don't. I love that. That's a great question. So here, I've actually, so when I've been talking about Georgia's latest law, I've been really talking about what does it mean for 2022 and our upcoming gubernatorial election. For that question, I would submit to you that these, whether it's Arizona, Wisconsin, you're looking at Michigan, you're looking at Georgia, some of these new voting laws, Georgia's already passed one signed by the governor. I don't think they're going to tamp down. I really don't think they're going to tamp down the conspiracy thinking. I cite my dear friend who I just had lunch with. James, don't care what you tell me, the election was stolen from Trump. That individual is not necessarily moved by what the Georgia legislature just did. The Georgia legislature, which is Republican in both chambers, they had to protect their right flank, right? I mean, we understand this. To avoid getting primaried, or God forbid, having Trump run a candidate against them, part of this was political survival, I think, in terms of why they pushed through legislation like this. I don't think, people who know me well would say, James, boy, if you're making a prediction, I'm putting money on the other side, because you have Green Bay winning the Super Bowl every stupid year, and they never do. But my prediction would be, I don't think it dissipates the conspiracy theories, right, about elections being stolen. If in 2022 or 2024, we have a razor close election in certain states where 10,000, 15,000 votes decided, I think you're going to still have clamoring about conspiracies because of it, especially if the side loses. If you lose on that side, I think you're going to still hear that clamoring, even if the state has done some limiting of early voting or done some limiting of how many ballot drop boxes you can have. I don't know that it really moves the needle. I think this is what's baked in. You know what will move the needle if a candidate accepts the election outcomes. Like Richard, I mean, my God, did Richard Nixon have reasons to contest 1960? Oh, thank you. Yes, Richard Nixon. If anybody should have contested, I'm sorry, I'm yelling, and you're probably going to have to lower your volume. Richard Nixon had all kinds of reasons to be contesting the 1960 election out of Texas and Chicago, especially Cook County. But you know what he did? He accepted it. Was Al Gore crestfallen by the Florida Supreme Court decision? You betcha. You betcha. So I don't know. I'm sorry for talking so long. My students know, oh my God, don't get him wound up. But I don't know that these laws are going to change much on conspiracy thinking or dampen conspiracy thinking. These are Republicans protecting their right flank. But future Republicans and Democrats, if they quickly and forcefully accept the election outcomes, even if they have questions, that's what I think dampens the conspiracy thinking. But Trump built you up for 4 years. Trump was kind of building you up for 4 or 5 years to the big claim that he unleashed in November, and was kind of brilliant. And he's raised a lot of money. He has raised a lot of money off of that. But I don't think these laws change that landscape. But gosh, I love all these questions.
Is there a more systemic problem of critical thinking skills not being taught when we're younger that contributes to people believing conspiracies?
Well, so that's an argument I made, right? That's an argument. So I've taught my conspiracy theory class for 15 years, 16 years. I don't know that it is. Right, that was my argument. Well, conspiracy thinking is a poor person's cognitive map. Conspiracy thinking is a cognitive map for lesser educated people, or those who don't have finely tuned critical thinking skills. I mean, I can't tell you how many. I mean, these people are incredibly bright, computer programmers, master's degrees, doctorates, and they will run with a conspiracy theory such as vast, massive election fraud. James, doesn't matter what you tell me, that entire election was stolen from Donald Trump. I mean, these people in all other aspects of their work and their life and their engineering. I mean, last time I checked, engineers have probably pretty good critical thinking skills. No shortage of engineers I run into, or finance professors. Well, I shouldn't say professors, finance individuals who will subscribe to conspiracy thinking. What I think it is, right? What I think we have to do, at least in a lot of our core classes, we've got to critically evaluate, and I guess some of that is critical thinking, but we've got to critically evaluate our news sources, right? I mean, we've got to be able to evaluate our news sources in terms of, those that are credible, those that are clearly promoting disinformation or actual misinformation to sway election results or to sway public opinion. So, I mean, those skills to me are absolutely critical in terms of how we invest or how we investigate news sources. But look, I don't know that we have seen, like, our general critical thinking skills, I don't know that we've seen them just dramatically plummet as a public over the last decade or two. I think we are awash in so much disinformation, so much misinformation, and we're increasingly isolated with lower levels of social capital and anomia. And I think, and we've been conditioned to distrust experts in all ways, shapes, and forms. I think that drives it more than maybe just a precipitous drop in our ability to do critical thinking. But I mean, others may disagree with me.
How important is watching news sources from outside the US to evaluate our news?
Well, again, I love all the media questions. I mean, look, I think, watching international perspectives, whether it's the BBC, World News Service, or others, I think that can provide a very valuable perspective. It would be a smaller sliver of the public, right, that is looking at international news sources. The Economist, I don't know if many people read or look at The Economist anymore, but The Economist provides fantastic news coverage of American politics, Latin American politics, global politics, European politics. So I think what that author is suggesting can have quite a benefit. It can have quite a payoff. But look, we're busy. Gosh, we're incredibly busy. And so, some of my asks about what we need to do in terms of news consumption or media consumption or social capital may seem unrealistic. But I also wanted to make one quick historical point. The conspiracy theories that LBJ or Nixon ultimately did in John F. Kennedy, you know where those started? European newspapers, right? As early as the end of 63 and into 64. And a lot of it was the Soviets, right? A lot of it was the Soviets planting disinformation into European newspapers about, well, Lee Harvey Oswald, what a waif of a man. What a loser. He couldn't have done this. It had to be someone like a Lyndon Baines Johnson. So I tell that story because the foreign press, of course, I mean, you all know this, the foreign press is hardly immune to conspiracy theories. If anything, we're seeing greater sentiment for the anti-vax conspiracy theories. We're seeing even more anti-vax conspiracy theories in some quarters of Europe than we do in the United States. So I think that's intriguing. So.
Do you think reforming the government in order to try and correct behavior that generates conspiratorial thinking is useful?
Well, I would
In other
say,
words,
right,
is the problem the thinking, or is the problem what the government is doing?
Yeah. Well, so it's a fair question, right? I mean, I think, I'm torn on this because, or I'm torn how to answer this. Transparency is a good thing, right? Transparency and sunshine laws are a good thing. Knowing more about what the government does. In fact, if you go back to the 1970s, the Church Committee that was investigating assassination plots of foreign leaders, and that's when a lot of the stuff came out about Fidel Castro and then the governments that we actually did topple and destabilize. So, I mean, I'm a big advocate of reforms like transparency and openness. Edward Snowden, I know not doing that with the endorsement of the United States government, but what Edward Snowden released can be very valuable. On the other hand, it ultimately fueled our conspiracy culture, didn't it? I mean, in the end, the more things we found out about the government actually assassinating people, actually toppling foreign governments, fuels our conspiracy thinking. So there's an example, right? Government reform from the 1970s forward, transparency, sunshine laws, more openness. That's fueled conspiracy thinking. That's very clear. Now, you could argue, well, okay, back it up, James. Let's reform the government where they kill fewer people. We're not spending as much money on the national security state. We're not trying to topple foreign governments. We're not engaging in cyber warfare. We're not engaging in assassination. Well, folks, this is the national security state is what it is. I don't mean to throw up my hands and say good luck reining it in, but if there's an area of reform that maybe helps to dampen conspiracy thinking, it would be maybe reining in the national security state and dealing with the surveillance. But I mean, if I'm gonna propose solutions to you that have little to no likelihood of being adopted anytime soon, how about I suggest to you we rein in the national security state in this country? I mean, right? Am I too cynical on that? That ain't gonna happen. That's my Oklahoma back. That ain't gonna happen. That's just not gonna happen. So great question though. Openness and reform can fuel conspiracy thinking. If we take a further step back and just say, well, let's stop bad behavior by government. Let's stop lying when we go into wars, which we have done at key historical markers throughout our history. Yeah, that could make a difference. It's just hard. It's just hard to see that come to fruition. But I love the question.
All right, we got one more. Do you think most major conspiracies have a nugget of truth?
Yes. In fact, that should be my one word answer to end, but thank you. What a beautiful question. I mean, all good conspiracy theories, and there's really bad conspiracies out there. I love the question earlier about modern, like maybe 21st century conspiracies are conspiracies without any theory, without any consequences, without any why. That's a great question. But yeah, all good conspiracies begin with certain fact patterns, historical developments. They give you a rationale, they give you a why. So yes is my answer, and they're entertaining, aren't they? I mean, what did I begin with? I love me some conspiracy theories. And my course on conspiracy theories, don't you think? I'll be able to teach that in 20 years. Now, hopefully we still have a functioning democracy. I don't want to leave you with a really negative taste in your mouth. Hopefully we still have a functioning republic. Hopefully we still have a functioning republic in this country in 20 years. And a lot of how we gather our news hasn't poisoned us. But conspiracy thinking, it's not going away, right? I can give this lecture and update it Like when Donald Trump Jr. becomes president in 2030 or 2030 something, 2040, Donald Trump Jr. Or Ivanka, I'll still be able to give these lectures and talk about this topic. But yeah, you betcha. Nuggets of truth, kernels of truth. Oh, that's how we get rocking and rolling on conspiracy thinking.
Do you find it interesting how selective people are? I sometimes am amazed because there are people who they'll talk about fake news, they distrust all experts, but they believe their stockbroker, they believe their carpenter, they believe their car mechanic, they believe their medical doctor. Maybe not about vaccines, but if they get cancer, they suddenly do whatever the doctor tells them. They believe the weather forecast for tomorrow. So for a lot of people, there are plenty of experts in their life that they trust. It's just when it comes to politics, they're going to dismiss everything unless they get the result they want. Does that seem reasonable?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, part of so I think you're right. Although we do and again, I'm getting a bit out of my area of expertise. I mean, I think I do think we see more questioning of now. I mean, if you're given a cancer diagnosis, and I hope this happens to no one who's joined us today, or it may have happened, and these are terrifying things. But I mean, I do think we have seen more and more people questioning their medical advice, right? I mean, beyond just vaccines, I think we see more and more people questioning their medical advice, drifting away from their churches. I mean, don't forget, one of the biggest fallouts of this pandemic is that church attendance may never recover to where it was pre-pandemic, and it was already dropping pre-pandemic. So I just see beyond politics. You're right, Lance. I mean, when it is connected to politics, it is accentuated like it's on steroids. But I still believe a lot of the literature that says, scientists, our doctors, even our religious officials, and sometimes with cause, if there's cases of bad behavior by clergy, we are slowly drifting away from these experts. But my friend, you made a critical point that I wanted to add, and I'm not looking to offend anybody. I mean, I understand the how close the 2020 election was, and my friend who said, James, don't care what you're going to say to me, the election was stolen from Trump. But how can you put faith? How can you put faith in Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, and Lin Wood, just to mention the cast of characters there, right? How do you put credibility or trust, my friend, right? How do you put trust in the legal skills and arguments of Sidney Powell, Lin Wood, and Rudy Giuliani, and then say Brad Raffensperger, a very decent man by all accounts, or the Georgia state elections official, a very good, these are Republicans, right? Who said, we ran a good election. And by the way, we counted ballots numerous times, and Biden's lead was about 10,000. Close. That doesn't mean Trump won. Does that make sense? How do you place faith in the legal arguments and the legal skills of Giuliani, Powell, and Wood when you then say, well, I of course in no way trust the Raffensperger, the Governor Kemps, or the state election official in Georgia? That fascinates me. Right. So that fascinates me, that I have this faith and this trust. Okay, these people are right. These people are right, but these people are wrong. It's intriguing. It's delicious. It is fascinating. So,
all right. Well, it has been wonderful. We're going to wrap it up there. We'll give him a virtual hand clap. I trust you're all joining me. We appreciate it very much. I hope you've all have enjoyed it. I'll leave the chat open for a little while if any students need to chime in or anybody needs to get in touch with me about anything. I hope you all have a good day. And with that, we will wrap it up.
Okay.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for having me. All right. Bye-bye.